December 1944. The Ardennes forest, Belgium. Snow, deep enough to swallow a man to his knees. Temperatures at -15. The trees were artillery-scarred, bark stripped to white bone. Somewhere in the distance, artillery was still rolling. The Battle of the Bulge had just begun. Germany's last desperate gambit, 250,000 soldiers thrown through frozen forests to split the Allied line in two. Hitler's generals had told him it was impossible. He'd overruled them. He always did. On the American side, panic. Units surrounded, communication lines cut, entire divisions swallowed by the German advance. And then, the phone call. Eisenhower to Patton. "George, the line is breaking. How fast can you turn Third Army north?" Patton looked at a map. His army was pointed east. He was asking them to pivot 90 degrees, hundreds of thousands of men, tanks, supply lines, in a blizzard, in days. Every military mind in the room said it couldn't be done. 3 weeks minimum, maybe a month. Patton said, 48 hours. Silence in the room. 48 hours? Eisenhower repeated. 48 hours, Patton said, and I'll drive straight through whatever's in my way. He did it in 48 hours. But what happened after, what no history textbook fully captures, was the moment when a captured German general looked Patton directly in the eye, in front of American soldiers, in front of his own defeated men, and said words no enemy had ever said to an American commander. And what Patton said back ended the conversation, permanently. Before we go any further, if you want more stories about the moments in World War II that history almost forgot, hit subscribe right now. We drop new stories every week, and you don't want to miss what comes next in this one. Most people know Patton from the 1970 film, George C. Scott, The Giant American Flag, The Slap, The Speeches. What most people don't know is how deeply strange Patton was, and how that strangeness was precisely what made him lethal. George Smith Patton, Jr. was born in San Gabriel, California, into a family that had been fighting in American wars since the Revolution. His grandfather died at the Battle of Opequon during the Civil War. His great-uncles fought for the Confederacy. He grew up surrounded by veterans, surrounded by stories of men who died beautifully for causes they believed in. He believed in reincarnation, genuinely, seriously believed it. He was convinced he had been a soldier in every major war in history. A Roman legionnaire, a soldier under Napoleon, a participant at Waterloo. He would visit battlefields in North Africa during World War II and describe in startling detail troop movements and terrain features he had never studied, and then confirm them against historical maps. His soldiers found it disturbing. His enemies found it useful, because Patton moved like a man who had already survived war before, like a man for whom death was merely an inconvenience he'd already met. He was also, by any objective measure, one of the most gifted tank commanders in military history. At a time when most generals still thought of tanks as infantry support, slow-moving steel boxes that helped foot soldiers cross open ground, Patton understood what tanks actually were: speed, terror, and firepower in one mobile package. He didn't use tanks to support the infantry, he used infantry to support the tanks. The Germans understood this before the Americans did. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, Germany's greatest tactician, studied Patton's movements in North Africa and reportedly said, "I read your book, Patton," meaning he'd read Patton's pre-war writings on armored warfare. Patton's tactics were so clean, so textbook, that they were recognizable even in real-time combat. This was the man who now had an SS general sitting across a table from him in a makeshift interrogation room somewhere in liberated Belgium. His name was SS Gruppenführer Heinrich Voss. He was 51 years old, 6'2", a career soldier who had joined the SS in 1933, not out of desperation, not because he had no other options, but because he believed. He was one of the true believers. Voss had commanded Waffen SS units on the Eastern Front, where the rules of war were treated as suggestions at best. He had overseen operations in Poland, in the Soviet Union, in France. He had been decorated 4 times. He wore the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, one of Germany's highest military honors. He was captured during the confusion of the Bulge's collapse. His command vehicle hit a mine. His driver was killed. His aide was killed. Voss crawled out of the wreckage with a broken collarbone and a concussion and walked directly into an American patrol.
For the first 48 hours of his captivity, he said nothing, gave his name, rank, and serial number, exactly what the Geneva Convention required, and not one word more. American interrogators tried everything: standard questioning, positive rapport, comparative pressure, telling him other officers had talked. Nothing. Voss sat across the table with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on the middle distance, like a man waiting for a bus that he was absolutely certain would arrive. Then someone made a mistake. Someone told Voss that General Patton personally wanted to speak with him. For the first time in 48 hours, Voss reacted. A smile, small, tight, the smile of a man who has just been told something he finds genuinely interesting. "Patton," he said in German. "Good. I have wanted to meet Patton." This is the part of the story most people have never heard. If you're finding this valuable, drop a comment below. Tell me what you already knew about Patton and what's surprising you. I read every single comment.
The room was a converted farmhouse kitchen. Stone walls, a single kerosene lamp, a wooden table that had probably hosted Belgian family dinners before the war arrived and swallowed everything. Major William Dunn, 3rd Army's senior intelligence officer, was present. He would later write about what happened in a letter to his wife that was declassified in 1978. 2 military police flanked the door. A translator, Sergeant Carl Fischer, a German-American from Milwaukee, sat in the corner. Voss was already seated when Patton entered. He was in his full SS dress uniform, which he had somehow managed to keep presentable despite 2 days in captivity. The Knight's Cross was at his throat. He sat straight, chin up. Patton walked in without ceremony. He wore his helmet liner, his riding boots, his twin ivory-handled pistols. He sat down across from Voss, placed both hands flat on the table, and looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Fischer translated as the exchange began. Voss spoke first. "General Patton," he said in German, "I requested this meeting." "I know," Patton said. "I wanted to see the man who moved an entire army 90 degrees in 48 hours during a blizzard. Our intelligence did not believe it was possible. Our generals argued about it for days afterward. How does a man make his soldiers do the impossible?" Patton said nothing. He let the question sit. Voss continued. His German was precise, formal, the German of educated men. Fischer translated quietly. "You do not fight the way Americans are supposed to fight. You do not wait for supply lines. You do not consolidate when you should push. You accept casualties other generals would consider catastrophic, and you keep moving." He leaned forward slightly. "General Patton," Voss said, "you fight like a German." The room went very still. Major Dunn would later write, "I've seen Patton in a lot of situations. I've seen him angry. I've seen him perform, but I've never seen him go as quiet as he went in that moment. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. It felt like 3 minutes. Patton looked at Voss for those 3 seconds. Then he looked at the Knight's Cross at Voss's throat. Then he looked back at Voss's face. "No," Patton said. One word. Fischer translated. Voss's jaw tightened. The Knight's Cross moved slightly at his throat as he swallowed. Patton wasn't finished. "You want to know how I moved 3rd Army in 48 hours? I told my men the truth. I told them soldiers were dying up north, and we were the only ones who could save them. American soldiers don't need to be ordered to do the impossible. They need to be told why it matters. Your army needed ideology and an Iron Cross. My army needed a reason. That's the difference between us." Another pause. "And that's why you lost." Voss said nothing. The conversation, for all practical purposes, was over. That response, that single line, if that hit you the way it hit me when I first read the transcript, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear a story like this right now. We'll be back to this story in a moment. What happened to Voss and what Patton did next is not what you expect. The interrogation continued for another 30 minutes, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Voss, to his credit, or perhaps to his training, did not break. He gave no intelligence, he revealed no unit positions, no command structures, no plans. He was a professional to the end. But something else happened. At the end of the session, as Patton stood to leave, Voss spoke again in German.
Fisher translated quietly to Major Dunn afterward. He said, "General, if you had been born in Germany, you would have been unstoppable." He meant it as a compliment. I don't think General Patton took it that way. Patton paused at the door. He looked back at Voss one final time. "If I'd been born in Germany," Patton said, "I wouldn't have had to come here to end this war." He walked out. Voss was transferred to a POW camp in England. He was held there through the Nuremberg period. In 1946, investigators looking into his Eastern Front service found documentation connecting him to civilian reprisals in occupied Poland, actions that went well beyond the rules of war. He was charged, tried, and convicted. He died in prison in 1953. Before the final chapter, drop your answer in the comments. Do you think Patton was the greatest American general of World War II, or is that title someone else's? I want to see your takes. Real debate only. Major Dunn's letter to his wife, written the night of the interrogation, was short. "Saw something today I won't forget. General P sat across from a very senior German officer, the kind who's used to being the most important man in the room. The German tried to flatter him, told him he fought like a German. General P didn't take the bait, didn't get angry, didn't perform. He just corrected the man, quietly, factually, and left. It sounds simple when I write it. It didn't feel simple in the room. What I keep thinking about is this. The German general believed that you fight like a German was the highest compliment he could pay, and I think General P understood that, and understood that the right response wasn't to be flattered and wasn't to be insulted. It was to explain, very calmly, why the premise was wrong. That's leadership. Not the yelling, not the speeches, the moment when the other man thinks he's won the conversation, and you show him without raising your voice that he never had it. Sergeant Fisher told the story differently decades later in an oral history recorded in 1971. "I was translating, so I had to stay neutral, stay professional, but I remember my hands were shaking, not because I was scared, because I kept thinking I'm sitting in the middle of something. I don't know what to call it, a duel, not with guns, a duel with everything that makes a man a soldier." The German general was good. He was smart. He was trying to get inside Patton's head, to make him feel flattered, to make him lower his guard, and Patton just didn't let it land. He took the compliment, turned it inside out, and handed it back. Fisher paused in the recording. "I've thought about that a lot over the years, how you take a compliment that's meant to diminish you and turn it into a lesson. That's not something you can teach a man. Either you see it or you don't. Patton saw it." If you made it this far, you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe so you never miss a story. And think about this while you watch. What would you have said in that room? Drop it in the comments. I want the best answers. George Patton died on December 21, 1945, not in battle, as he'd always imagined he would have, but in a car accident in Heidelberg, Germany. A truck hit his staff car. He died of a pulmonary embolism 12 days later. He was 60 years old. The war was over. He'd been planning to retire. He is buried at the Luxembourg American Cemetery, not separated from his men, but at the front of their ranks. He asked to be buried where he could face his soldiers, so he does. The conversation with Voss, the interrogation, the compliment, the response, was never in Patton's memoirs. It was not in the official Third Army records. It survived because one major wrote a letter to his wife, and one translator told an oral historian in 1971. History is full of gaps like this, the moments that actually defined men, not the battles, not the maps, not the formal records, but the rooms, the silences, the 3 seconds before someone speaks. Patton spent those 3 seconds deciding what kind of man he was going to be in front of an enemy who expected to impress him. He decided to be exactly who he was. That's why we're still talking about him. That's the story, the room, the silence, the 3 seconds, and the response that ended it. If this hit you, subscribe, share it with one person, and leave a comment. What's the most powerful response you've ever seen someone give when they were being tested? Tell me. The best comment gets pinned. I'll see you in the next story.